Hello, everybody, and welcome to this. I'm not going to hide it. Very exciting LinkedIn Live today. We've been absolutely energized backstage, so to speak, today, and I'm absolutely delighted and really thrilled. I don't think I can say any other energizing words. I'm sure I'll fit them in by my two guests today. So I'm going to kick us off straight away and let them introduce themselves. What I'm going to do is I'm going to throw in a little ice melter question to get us going. So, Steve, perhaps you could introduce yourself to everybody, and I'd like you to answer what was the inspiration behind writing the 2-hour job search, first of all.
Absolutely. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. The inspiration for the 2-hour job search. So I've been a career coach for 20 plus years now. The inspiration for the 2-hour job search was the 2008 financial crisis. I saw students getting laid off. I saw my students having their offers rescinded. And that's devastating. You think your search is over and then you realize it's just begun, except you've lost all momentum. And I realized that the tips that I was giving them were overwhelming them. They were hurting them rather than helping them. This thing called YouTube came along. It gave exact instructions for any household repair you needed to do. And I wondered, why aren't there exact instructions for this really critical life skill of providing for yourself and your loved ones? And so that set me down a path using the lessons I learned from my former lives as a chemical engineer, strategy consultant, and marketer to create that set of instructions for providing for yourself and your loved ones.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, Kris, slightly different question for you. Please introduce yourself, and your starter for 10 question is, what do you like about the 2-hour job search from a career coaching context?
Yeah, hello everyone. So my name is Kris Thorne, and I'm a coach and facilitator for 1080. And career coaching is a large part of what I do. And I mean, I can't say enough about the book because I'm forever recommending it. And three reasons really. So firstly, when I coach people in career transition, the length of that program can vary quite hugely, and I may get a very short window of time to help that person. And so having a resource like this that I can signpost them to lay out a plan for how we're going to approach the job search and then check in on that as we go is incredibly useful. And the book not only lays out the process, but it also answers how do I actually do it? It gives a lot of FAQs as well. The second reason is that oftentimes when we're looking for a role, we don't know what we don't know, and we have a very blinkered view of what the market's like, what the opportunities are like, what we could be doing. And using an approach like this, it really opens up a lot of possibilities and a lot more hope and energy for people to stay resilient through that job search. And the third reason is it works. I mean, I have seen people land interviews. I've seen people get jobs. I've seen people have conversations where people have created roles for them because of using the approach. So, I mean, I can't advocate it enough, really. It's incredible.
Are you blushing enough yet, Steve?
A little bit. I'm rather pale, and blushing shows up pretty readily. So, yes.
We've entered superfan territory, I think, which is great. It's amazing. Let me bring up, we've got loads of comments already, and we haven't even started properly yet, which is amazing. We've got people joining us from I'm going to say all around the world. They're joining us from all around the world, which is absolutely amazing. I'm going to bring up the first question. Steve, I'm going to go straight to you on this one. There's no better resource for this one. And that is, well, why is it called the 2-hour job search?
The $1 million question. Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of people have the wrong idea of why it's called that. They think it refers to you do 2 hours of job searching a day. Absolutely not. Nothing's arbitrary. Some people think it means you'll have a job in 2 hours. And if that were the case, the book would be way more expensive. What it refers to is the amount of time it would take me if you said, Steve, it is 8 a.m. Eastern time, you're fired. Start looking for a job right now. By 10 a.m., I'd be done for the day. I'd have gotten as far as I could on my own. At that point, I would simply need other people's assistance. Like, this is not a solo sport. It is a team sport, and you need to assemble your own team. So in 2 hours, I could control everything that I possibly could to set up the most advantageous and strategic job search I could. But at that point, I would simply need to wait for responses. But everything after that first 2 hours is dictated by a bunch of if-then statements. There's exact instructions for every step of the process. but the title itself refers to the amount of time it takes you to set it up from scratch. So it's not a huge time investment, and everything that happens from that point forward depends on the response you get from those you reach out to. But that first 2 hours, doing the right things for the first 2 hours, sets you on a glide path for success.
Fantastic. Brilliant. It's fascinating to hear you talk. And when we run these sessions normally, right at the end, we normally have a top tips section. I've even done away with that today. So I love this thought about it's instruction, not tips. So it's really, really good. And Kris, do you find that in a coaching context, it's really setting that foundation stone in place to say, look, follow this, it works. And so is that what you find?
Yeah, absolutely. Because what I find is that firstly, people need to get clear on what it is that they want, because there can be that initial response, especially if it's a redundancy, which is oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I've got to find a job tomorrow, that panic stage. And when you have something like this, it's like, okay, hang on, calm down. We're going to break it down. We're going to take this big overwhelm with something called the job search and the next role. And we're actually going to figure out how do we actually go about doing it in a systematic way. And that just takes a lot of the pressure and the overwhelm out of it.
It's almost saying to people, just breathe.
Exactly. And how do I do it? Because that's the thing, we're really not taught how to do this.
Now you've lined me up perfectly there, Kris. It's almost like you knew what the next question was. You've lined me up perfectly. Steve, I'm going to come back to you because of the writing of the book. It's really split into those three sections that I put on the screen: prioritize, contact, convince. Tell us a bit more about that and the philosophy behind it, if you would, please.
Yeah, so the book is really hyper-focused on the key bottleneck most job seekers experience in their job search in the modern post-monster.com era, the online job posting era, if you will. That's getting the first interview. I think if job seekers were confident they could continue getting first interviews, they'd be confident about their prospects of getting jobs. But getting the first interview is incredibly tough. And the engineer in me wanted to break that process down into its component parts. And the first is prioritization. There are literally millions of companies out there, but to approach them in a strategic way, which means networking. 12 out of 13 jobs go to referrals for every one that goes to an online applicant. So to get those referrals, I don't expect people to have them in their back pocket already. That means networking, and networking takes time and effort and energy. So prioritization is a key first step. Before we start investing hours into building relationships, let's run some data and see which companies are best worth that finite resource. Then the outreach is about, okay, now that we have the companies identified, who do we reach out to at those companies? And then how do we reach out to them to maximize the odds that we don't just maximize our response rate, but maximize our response rate from people who might actually be helpful. And then once you get those people on the phone, that's where the convincing happens. How do you recruit an advocate? How do you change a stranger into an ally in a single 30-minute conversation? So that's all about the informational meeting and the follow-up itself. You're trying to take a stranger on a journey where they trust you enough to expend their own social capital on your behalf, despite there not really being that much in it for them at all. The only risk, no upside. They're doing it out of the goodness of their heart. So that is a specific kind of conversation that most people, if not all people, are not trained to conduct.
And both of you have been talking about, you only know what you know, and therefore it's about sort of peeling off the unknown layers to a degree. There's a bit in the book, there's lots of highlights in the book. And I'm going to say it now on Steve's behalf, if you haven't got the book, buy the book, because it's really, really good. One of the bits in there is when it questions you, think of a soda pop or a fizzy drink, then think of another, then think of another, then think of another. How many people immediately think Coke and Pepsi? Because we're going to what is obvious first and less obvious or unknown afterwards. How's that work for you, Kris, in the coaching context as well? That sort of trying to get to that unknown, uncharted territory.
Yeah, and that's a great question, because I think Well, and I think initially, I guess it is partially getting people to think outside the box a little bit, because there's a tendency. I know when I sit there and I talk with clients about, okay, let's leverage the network, and how can you actually work through that to then reach out to people to have these advocacy conversations. And it's our CEO Michael Moran has a great technique that we often use, where we help people to prioritize that network by who do they know, who have they helped, how much influence they have, and prioritize that outreach. Because initially you want to reach out to people that are hopefully going to give you a bit of a response. I'd almost call it like a warm lead, I suppose, when it comes to that, because then for a start, it gets you to start telling your story. Why am I looking? What am I looking for? Why would I be great at this? And it starts to ease you into that process, I think, of doing this outreach in a I guess even like a cold way, with people that you don't know. So I would say, start with the ones that you do know, to move to the ones that you don't know. But the key thing with all of these is that you will not come out of those conversations the same way you went in. You will definitely come out with new ideas and new perspectives and possibilities that you didn't have before.
And Steve, just thinking about the prioritize, contact, and convince, and you were talking really about the bottlenecks for people. Where do you think the hardest challenges in those three for most people? Is it one particular area, or is it very unique to the individual? What's your thoughts on that?
Honestly, so the way I look at the 2-hour job search is it's a detailed recipe, and like any good recipe, it's testable. So you follow the instructions in the same way, you should get a dish that tastes the same as somebody who followed the instructions on the other side of the planet did. To me, I think the hardest step of the process seems to be embracing a low success rate strategy. And low success rate doesn't mean a bad success rate. It just means that we are not accustomed as a modern society to failing more often than we succeed. Think of those things that you do in your life. There are not many situations where you're comfortable failing more often than you succeed. I've tried to find non-sports analogies for this because I think analogies are very helpful. But I literally can't find a non-sports analogy that most people can relate to. The best one I can come up with is baseball players. They get paid millions of dollars to only succeed 30% of the time they play offense. Every time they go to the plate, if you are hitting 3 out of 10 balls for successfully, you are incredibly rich. But that's not anywhere else in our life, where 3 out of 10 is a good conversion rate. The job search, 3 out of 10 is exceptional, but we don't have any practice for that resilience and grit in our normal lives, because we've had to be 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 at everything we've done to make our career paths what they are. So embracing strategies that are built more around probabilities and low odds of success, but they are least bad alternatives. Even though you're only successful when you reach out to a total stranger 20% of the time, the people who do respond to you are going to be disproportionately helpful. You're going to have to kiss a lot of frogs to find your princes or princesses in this process, but it's absolutely worth it. But we just don't have any training for that sort of situation where we fail more often than we succeed. I think that the vulnerability of asking strangers for their help is not something we're trained to do. We're not trained to fail more often than we succeed, but this absolutely requires it. I think the good news of it all is that because it's so intimidating to fail more often than you succeed, few people do it. And so those that embrace the chaos, the probabilities of like, yeah, most people are going to ignore me, but the people who get back to me are going to be disproportionately helpful if I follow this set of recipes. Those people are going to be disproportionately successful in their job search.
But don't you think that you're, even with a probability rate or success rate of what you've just said, Steve, it's still probably a higher probability rate than you have of applying online against hundreds of applicants, going into a black hole with your CV and, hoping you come out the other side?
Absolutely. I've recently formalized a concept that I've been talking about for a while, but never named. And I now call it the 5% rule. So if any of you all are out there and you're like, oh, networking, man, I definitely don't want to do that. That sounds hard. I don't know how to do it. First off, it's not your fault. You've never been trained to do this. So it's like being embarrassed that you can't ride a bicycle when you've never been taught, or you can't swim when you've never been taught. This is not on you. This is an education issue. But for me, I think the lost my train of thought. Can you repose that question, Kris?
The 5% rule.
Oh, 5% rule. Thank you. The 5% rule, if you're skeptical that networking will outperform online job postings, well, I can't miss out on that posting. What if it disappears? What if I network and by the time I get around to applying, it's gone? I've heard I need to be the first 50 people that apply to every job posting. I would strongly disagree with that. Those online postings take time and energy. And during that expensive time and energy, you don't learn anything. You don't become a stronger candidate for your next application or your next conversation. So if you are looking for a way to decide, is networking a better use of or worse use of time than applying online, I recommend the 5% rule. And what that states is if you apply to 20 jobs that you actually want, are you hearing back from at least one of them? So this doesn't count rage applying. You can apply to tons of jobs you don't want. Those don't count. But for the jobs you actually want, when you apply, are you hearing back 1 out of 20 times, which is 5%? If you're hearing back more than 5% of the time, chances are you've done this job before, but somewhere else, or you're a more junior, less experienced job seeker, in which case, feel free to apply first, network second. But if you're not hitting 5%, that's hours and hours of unproductive time. That's just wearing you out. It's debilitating. And it makes it really hard to network. So if you are not getting responses back more than 5% of the time, my recommendation is you're not missing out on much if postings go away. In fact, those postings are doing you a favor by disappearing. Just because the posting goes away doesn't mean your networking isn't useful. So if you're networking, that's a benefit that lasts the entire rest of your job search. It's not something that either pays off immediately or it doesn't pay off at all. Online job postings are the equivalent to me of trying to get rich by buying lottery tickets. It's a terrible odds of success. And yeah, sure, you might win immediately and save yourself a bunch of pain and anxiety of working or doing something else. But you are not improving your odds tomorrow just because you were unsuccessful 1,000 times today.
Yeah. And I think a couple of things that are coming out of all of this for me is we do only know what we know, and we're a little bit pre-programmed into thinking and behaving in a particular way when we're looking for a job or researching for a job or applying for a job. And I think the other thing that's really, really coming out of it is because we haven't embraced the chaos, although my wife would probably tell you otherwise, that I have embraced the chaos, we need to be kind to ourselves around, both of you mentioned about the well-being behind the job search. And I think we have to be kind to ourselves and say, look, it's okay. It's absolutely fine. We've got lots of comments coming in. So I'm just going to throw a couple in here just for us to, Michael saying, I should have said that introductions to targets from people you know well, you've invested in, they have the power to influence. And that was to something else he said was he'll get in front of 40 to 70% of those people you know well, have invested in and have that power to influence, which really comes back to the point that you were making, Kris, about who do you know, why do you know them, what's the influence there. Andy has said this is liberating, which is fantastic to see as well. And we've also got lots of comments about networking is key, and it's explaining it step by step. We keep saying that word networking, which brings me brilliantly on to my next question. And I think it's going to be a toss of a coin to see who answers this first. Probably Steve, we'll let you get your breath back. And Kris,
please.
Kris, why is networking so hard?
So hard, yeah. Well, I think firstly, to come back to Steve's point, we're not really taught how to conduct a proper job search and how to find jobs, because we're kind of sent down this path of, this is how you do it. This is the traditional approach. And I think, certainly from my own experiences of networking and having worked with clients, it's that kind of heart-stopping moment of you're trying to engage with someone and you hear the infamous elevator pitch, and you've got to grab their attention. And it's coming up, sometimes it can be coming up with that quick introduction to get people to even want to engage in that conversation. How do you do that? Because there is a little bit of an art, and that's something that I coach people on. And I think there is something about this feeling of why would these people help me? Because if I haven't got something I can give in return, or, how is that going to work? How am I going to get them on side? You kind of almost a squeamish feeling. And I guess what I'd say to that is that actually, maybe in that initial moment, there may not be something immediately that springs to mind that you can do, but I'll tell you what, there's almost always something you can offer other people that is of value, whether that's your time, or you connect them with somebody, or maybe there's an article or resource that you find later, or whatever it is. The opportunity will emerge if you just put it on your radar. And I think we desperately want to be connected, especially post-COVID. I think people are very hungry now for, more connection. And I think people are open to this. Just a funny story I heard, not funny, but a story I heard recently was of someone who had actually applied to a job online. There was like 500 applicants, the usual sort of, oh my gosh, it disappeared into the ether. And they thought, what, I'm just going to reach out to the hiring manager on LinkedIn anyway, and just, say, I tried to apply, couldn't apply, or I was afraid my application got lost, just wanted to know who I was, what I was about. And you know what? That hiring manager was so grateful for that connection, because they're going, oh, I'm looking at this stack of 500 CVs. Let's have an interview. And they got an interview because they weren't afraid to make that connection and make the first move. And I think that's something we need to teach people, is how to just make the first move and connect with people, because this is not just a job search skill, it's a life skill as well.
Brilliant. Steve, coming to you on the same question then. Come on, why is networking so hard? Help me.
I think the lack of training is a big piece of it, but there's also a big shame element to it, especially for more experienced professionals. Like, this is not a job seeker specific skill. This is not a junior professional skill. This is an entire career skill. This is for people who have jobs and want to protect themselves from layoffs or get promoted. You have to have the ability to turn strangers into advocates. I think a lot of people conflate network. I think networking, that term is too vague to really be helpful. When people talk about networking, they're often talking about a blend of what I call reactive networking and proactive networking. If you ask a stranger on the street, are you good at networking? They'll probably say something. I was shocked at this, how people would say, yeah, I'm pretty good at networking, when that did not match what happened in my office with the job seekers that I'd meet, who would be terrified of it. And then when I drilled down, I realized when you ask a stranger if they're good at networking, how they'll explain it is, whenever I'm placed on teams, I get along with my teammates, and some of them become lifelong friends. That's reactive networking. You are getting along with someone who's expecting to share space with you back. So you're both into it. Otherwise known as cooperation. We've been practicing this since kindergarten or our primary school days. That is table stakes. You learn that naturally through age, just through repetition. But proactive networking, how do you turn a stranger into an advocate, someone who's not expecting to engage with you back? That is a totally different skill. That is a unique skill set that you need to be taught, because it's not intuitive. You will not naturally learn it with age. So it's one thing to get your manager's endorsement at promotion time or when they're talking about redundancies. But what you really need to do is get your manager's peer, the manager of the other group, to say your name as well. Like, yeah, you've got potential. I like that person. And that means proactively developing a relationship with this person that is not expecting to have a relationship with you back. And that is a life skill. So I think networking is so hard because people conflate reactive networking with proactive networking, not realizing proactive networking is a different skill. And I think it's hard because a shame element creeps in the more experience you get. When you feel like I've been teaching people for 20 years in my career now, it's hard to put the learner hat back on and ask smart people how they got so smart at their jobs. But that's really what proactive networking boils down to, is asking people for the gift of their time and knowledge. And that's the gift you're giving them back, is asking them how they got so good at their jobs and engaging thoughtfully with their answers.
Brilliant. We've got a question come in that I want to bring up onto the screen. Kris is saying, how do you recommend revivifying? Well, I'm glad I haven't got the dog's teeth in for that one. Revivifying relationships on stale. That's a great question, Kris. What do we think about that one? Steve, maybe. Oh, no, Kris, you go.
Steve, you go ahead. That's fine.
I am a big believer in data. To me, this is conventional wisdom that I think hurts people. Try to revive existing relationships. In my experience of the 2-hour job search was first thought of in 2008. It is harder to change the urgency of an existing contact than it is to establish an urgent relationship with a brand new contact. So that old college roommate that you fell out of touch with, they've only known you in a casual, laid back way. And if the first time you're reaching out to them in 2 or 3 years is to ask them for their help, to advocate for you for a job, especially a job that's not their job function, so they don't know those people, that's weird, that's awkward. So I split contacts into 3 groups. Curmudgeons, who will ignore you no matter what you say. Obligates are the worst group, though, because they want to appear to be helpful to not lose face, but they don't actually want to be helpful, because being helpful means incurring risk that they're not comfortable incurring. And there are boosters who are intrinsically motivated to help you. The existing contacts are very likely to be obligates. They feel the sense of obligation to help you, but they don't really feel comfortable incurring that risk. So they'll often really disappoint and frustrate you. They'll do just enough to like not let you down immediately, but they wear you out. And you're like, if my old college roommate won't help me, nobody will help me. So for me, I treat existing contacts just like any other stranger that you'll reach out to. They get the same amount of time to respond before you move on to someone else. So I'm very anti-existing relationships for that reason. If the person is in your job function of choice at that particular company, by all means, go for it. Even if they're not in your job function, go for it. But it's going to be an awkward informational because you don't genuinely care about the work that they're doing or how they got so smart at their job. It's more transparently, I need to utilize this relationship to get somewhere else to talk to someone more important.
And I think the great thing about networking is, and certainly when we think about the motivation to help other people through it being the right thing to do rather than needing something in return, is I kind of believe that karma suggests that somebody else is going to help me, which means somebody else is going to help somebody else. Quick couple of comments before we go to another question. Amy's saying, I think networking can be a challenge for neurodivergent people, but it could be so much more valuable as they can express their skills and qualities in a more personal environment. And Steve, you're going to love this comment, and just forewarning you now, get ready. Alison says, order the book as we're talking. Looking forward to reading more great tips. So brilliant. Okay, let's move on to now. Come on, I need a job. I need to stay afloat. What do we say to somebody who just needs to take a job to stay afloat financially? Kris, you've been quiet for at least a minute.
I had a feeling this one was coming my way, and it is a tricky one, to be fair, because obviously, our survival instincts kick in, and sometimes, yes, I shouldn't say sometimes, but yeah, obviously there is pressure to find the next thing when you've got bills to pay, or you've got a family, or you've got, whatever obligations. And in the short term, it can seem like, okay, just firing off a whole lot of, of applications is like, it feels like you're doing something because you've sent off all of these applications. And I guess what I would say is, okay, fine. Yeah. If you see a job out there, go ahead and do that. If it helps you to feel like you're doing something. However, it is worth kind of looking at this approach and putting it into practice. It's a bit, because however long it takes you to find a role, whether you apply frantically online or whether you put this job search practice into practice, and you start the wheels rolling, it's going to be about the same amount of time, really. And hopefully, by doing this, and do it alongside the other, talking to recruiters and so forth, but do this because it's going to pay dividends. It's going to pay off longer term. And what I always say to people is, get clear on what kind of job it is, because sometimes, they just think, well, I just need to get the same job I had before because that's what I know. That's where I'm most likely to get a job. But it was quite draining and soul destroying, and they're going to be miserable. And I always encourage them to be a bit courageous and go, right, okay, come on, let's use this as an opportunity to genuinely think about, what are you actually good at? What do you enjoy doing? What would people pay you for? The ikigai, and actually then, honing in on that. Why can't you, find that job in that industry or that sector, that whatever it is, because the time is going to go by regardless of what you do. So why not use it in service of something that you're probably going to be more engaged and stick with? Because otherwise you might just take a job and then 6 months down the road, you find that you've jumped from the frying pan into the fire. What do you think, Steve?
Nothing really to add there. I think you've got to do what you got to do to make ends meet, but operations theory says you need to put your bottlenecks first. And the bottleneck in any effective job search is hearing back from people. People take time to respond. So what you do in your downtime while you're waiting for people to respond is fine. Apply all you want, but nothing should delay your efforts to network, because that you can't accelerate. As you get more experienced with how to manage it, you can reach out to more companies simultaneously. But I recommend a very specific process called 3B7 for managing your outreach within companies. That's the fastest you can go, but that is limited by people's response times. So absolutely take work to make ends meet, but you can't accelerate an effective job search. Applying to more and more online postings comes back to the 5% rule. You think that's how you're accelerating your search, but in reality, you're just wearing yourself out and distracting yourself from higher benefit actions.
And that's where we're going to run out. Well, we have run out of time, but I've got one more question I want to throw at you, Steve, if I may. Just for everybody that's joined us today, there's a lot of comments and questions that I haven't been able to get to. By all means, carry on that conversation on the LinkedIn post and the feed, and the video of this will be available there as well. There's lots of questions that we will try and engage with as much as we can. And I think, what you've both been talking about is that whole energy management challenge, which is all, is another aspect of the whole trying to find work, and don't use up all your energy on the wrong things. So my last question, and those that have bought the book while we've been talking, get ready to click buy again, because there is a second book that you wrote. Was it about 9 years after the first edition of the 2-Hour Job Search came out?
Yes, I am not what you call prolific. Yeah.
So the Job Closer, what prompted you? This is the elevator pitch for Job Closer because of time. What prompted you to write that, and why should we buy it?
The 2-Hour Job Search is one recipe for networking for first interviews. I had people who were so successful with the 2-Hour Job Search. It worked in the 2008 financial crisis, and it worked in the boom times that followed. So it works in both bad and good economies. And people would come back to me and say, Steve, this worked great. What interview books do you recommend? And I'm like, I kind of hate them all too, because they're all tips and no instructions. Nothing's accountable when it's presented to you in the form of tips. You can't replicate tips, but instructions you can replicate. So it only took me 9 years, but I created a set of recipes for all of the steps before and after networking in your job search, because job searching has only gotten more complex since our parents and grandparents did it. They just used to have to do resumes and cover letters, but now we've got to do resumes and cover letters and LinkedIn and social media and proactive networking with strangers, because we can't just apply to want ads anymore. So I created frameworks that help you become more effective in less time for all of the necessary evils of your job search, from resumes and cover letters on the front end before an interview, to answering "tell me about yourself" well, and negotiating and maximizing your odds of getting promoted on the back end. Those are all collected. It's a collection of smaller recipes before and after networking that will save you time and immediately increase your efficacy in your search.
Brilliant. Look, we've gone a few minutes over, but can I just say thank you to both of you. I have really, really enjoyed our time together today, and I'm hoping that lots of people have got. I can see from the comments people are.
Loads of comments, yeah.
The conversation is going to carry on LinkedIn, I think, which is great. So thank you ever so much to both of you. Thank you everyone that's joined us live, and if you're watching on repeat. Then it's been great to see so many comments and questions. I'm going to close the stream down now, but thank you once again, Kris, and thank you, Steve, for joining us all the way from across the pond. That's fantastic. So thank you very much, everyone, and bye for now.